Hello, I'm Helen Daly. Welcome to The Nation. Well, the silly season hasn't really started yet, though there was a sign of perhaps an early onset this week. The nuclear power debate that we had to have came and went after the Prime Minister dismissed the idea and put it off till next year's ALP conference, saying that Labor supporters of nuclear power were still going to have a very big job convincing anyone of changing. Federal Parliament had the last sitting for the year and there was still no sign of an abatement in hostilities between Julia Gillard and Tony Abbott. We had a pledge by the PM to look at the carbon price next year. We had a bit of a dismal national accounts figures, and last but not least we had a change of government in Victoria. The Coalition took power after 11 years in the wilderness, and I think the new Premier, Ted Baillieu, got more publicity doing a press conference in his budgie smugglers by the pool where he does laps. Maybe the silly season really has started. But we have a stellar lineup for our panel this evening. On my left is Labor Senator from New South Wales, Doug Cameron, Independent Senator from South Australia, Nick Xenophon, Editor-at-Large of the Australian newspaper, Paul Kelly, and Liberal MP from New South Wales, Paul Fletcher. Welcome to you all. Now, we did have an historic win in the Victorian election this week. No one saw a change of government coming, really, until the final polls, Paul Kelly. Why was the mood swing missed?
I think what we see at the moment is a conflict between what I call the insider and outsider view of politics. And I think the political class, to a certain extent, is misreading what's going on in the country. We've seen this now at the national level, with the Liberals doing much better than expected over the course of the past 12 months after Tony Abbott became leader. In Victoria, the Labor Party believed that the Brumby government would be re-elected. They believed the Brumby government was the best government in this country. It's most interesting to see that both The Age and the Australian newspaper editorialised in favour of the re-election of the Labor government in Melbourne, but the voters thought otherwise. The voters said no. I think this is a very significant change of government. It means that after we get to the New South Wales election next March, we'll have 3 Liberal governments in the country in very important states, Sydney, Melbourne and Perth.
All right, before we get to what that means for Julia Gillard and the government, Doug Cameron, why did Labor lose when everyone seemed to think that they were going to win?
Well, I think the analysis will take some time. And, I think
Paul's right that the political class was reading things differently to the electorate?
I don't know. I really don't know if that's the correct analysis. I think, campaigns count, services count, and all the bread and butter issues come into state elections, and I think that's what happened.
But this is a Premier who, in his concession speech, the former Premier now, he said the economy in Victoria is the envy of Australia, it's the envy of many in the world. Things were going right for Victoria. He claimed to have created a lot of jobs. Those things, key things once upon a time in an election, didn't seem to count for all that much this time. Why not?
Because I still think there is this issue of services, and people do feel that they need services from state governments. There has been issues in terms of the privatisation of transport services in Victoria. It's never recovered from privatisation. It's a big problem, and I think people see that as a key issue.
Paul Fletcher, I think you'd agree even people in the Liberal Party missed that this was going to happen. There was talk perhaps of a hung parliament. Many on your side didn't think Baillieu could do it.
Well, I think we believe that with a determined campaign and a clear focus on what the people of Victoria wanted, that we were very much in with a chance. And I think what it demonstrates, I think one of the things that is significant is that people in Victoria had the chance to see 2 or 3 months of a federal government that really wasn't going anywhere, a federal government that was too tied into the agenda of the Greens, and they saw this as an opportunity to make a choice in favour of a party that was focused on the concerns of the community and delivering services rather than playing internal games.
All right, so you think it was very much a response to federal Labor, nothing to do with state issues?
Oh, well, there are obviously a whole constellation of factors there, but I don't think you can ignore the fact that the people of Victoria, when they came to make their decision, had seen effectively paralysis at a federal level for 2 or 3 months, and they'd seen an agenda which was being dominated by the exotic concerns of the Greens rather than responding to the day-to-day concerns of Australians.
Nick Xenophon, do you think they saw a paralysis at the federal level?
No, look, I've got a slightly different take on this. I think that in the age of Facebook and Twitter, people are much more impatient. I think that's one of I think that politics has changed in this country, and I'd like to hear what Paul Kelly has to say about that.
What do you mean?
Well,
impatient?
I think that the news cycle is no longer. I think 70 years ago, the PM or the opposition leader could go across the Nullarbor to go to Perth to campaign in Perth. There'd be no news from them for 3 or 4 days. That would be unheard of. You don't hear from the PM for a day. Then there's something wrong. So I think that there is an impatience in the electorate. There's a sense of immediacy. There's a sense of people wanting action, and I think voters are less patient than they were, particularly in an age of instant communication and where the news cycle sometimes can be 6 hours, let alone 24 hours.
Nick Xenophon, do you think there are some very hard lessons for the Greens out of the Victorian result?
I don't think their actual result was that bad in terms of their vote, but because Ted Vallew made that decision, and I think Helen Kroger had a lot to do with it as well, to say we will not preference the Greens. I think, interestingly, that galvanised the Conservative support base, the Liberals, and I think in the same way that Tony Abbott galvanised the coalition supporters by his stand on the ETS, rightly or wrongly. I think it actually was very smart politically, and I think Ted Vallew did the right thing politically, even though at the time I thought that they were being mugs doing that, but clearly that was wrong.
Yeah, and he was criticised a lot internally in the party. Paul Kelly, what did you make of not just the move, because we know he did it and it worked out well for him. Are there some hard lessons for Bob Brown and the Greens?
I think there are. I think it's most interesting that the Liberals decided to call the bluff of the Greens. I think the Greens will now need to rethink their tactics. I think the Liberal Party, though, will play this on an issue-by-issue, election-by-election, seat-by-seat basis from now on. But there are some very important takeouts. I'd note, though, that the damage done to the Greens in this election was damage perpetrated by the Liberal Party, not by the Labor Party. I disagree very much with those people who say that the Green vote has peaked. The Greens are going to be around for a long period of time. They appeal to very deep elements in the Australian community, and I think these efforts to write off the Greens are very, very premature and quite wrong.
So you reckon it's just a thing they've got to change their strategy about how they win seats, how they're going to get preferences, but don't write them off at all?
Well, I certainly wouldn't be writing them off, and clearly the Greens, in terms of their environmental policies, their economic policies, their social policies, do appeal to a very strong ideological strand in the Australian community. I think that they've got a loyal batch of support that they can build upon.
Nick?
Well, just say, I mean, I work with the Greens in the Senate close up. We're on the crossbenches together. I think the media perception this was a bad result for the Greens was because of the expectation that they'd pick up 3 or 4 inner Melbourne seats.
Fair enough expectation.
That was a fair enough expectation, but once the Libs did the deal, and it was a smart thing for them to do, that was it for them. So, but they will still have the balance of power in the Senate from July the 1st for 1, possibly 2 terms, maybe even longer. And I think so long as Bob Brown, particularly as leader, who up close he's very collegial in his approach to his colleagues, I think that they will be a very significant player.
All right, well, I need to move on. The federal implications, because we'll talk about the Greens a little later in the program. Federal implications, Paul, you mentioned that Julia Gillard might now face 3 coalition premiers at COAG after April next year if New South Wales falls to the Liberals as well. Would that, Doug Cameron, be much harder for her to get her agenda up?
Well, not particularly, because I think the premiers have to act in the national interest. And if Labour takes issues to COAG that are clearly in the national interest, it's extremely difficult for state premiers, regardless of their political views, to act against the national interest. And that's the key issue for Labour, taking issues that are in the national interest to COAG and developing that agenda.
All right, well, on the health issue that we saw that Kevin Rudd fought tooth and nail for, we did see, certainly Victoria was a standout for a while, but the WA Premier, who happens to be a Liberal, still stayed out. Now, with 2 other potential coalition colleagues, they could make life pretty miserable, couldn't they, around the COAG table for the Labor government?
Well, I think if you look at history and you see how the COAG operation was worked under John Howard, you can see that you can work with premiers of the opposite persuasion. That's clearly the position that was adopted, and I just say it's going to be difficult for premiers to continue to hang out against more nurses, more beds, better services in hospitals. Pretty tough for premiers to really hang out into next year on these key issues.
Paul Fletcher, is it any different to when John Howard was, certainly for quite a while, surrounded by all Labor premiers?
Well, I'd agree with Doug to this extent.
That's a first.
The mere fact that you've got premiers from one party, a Prime Minister from another party, doesn't mean that you can't make progress. In fact, if you think back to the early 90s, when you had Nick Greiner as Premier of New South Wales and Bob Hawke as Prime Minister, that was really the genesis of the fundamental competition reforms which have been so critical to microeconomic reform and progress over the last 15 or more years. The important thing is what's on the COAG agenda and driving COAG forward. You know, COAG met 4 times last year, it's only met once this year, and the chairman of COAG, Paul McClintock, has been quoted today. Well, that's true, but Paul McClintock has been quoted as making the point that the Prime Minister really needs to step up and lead the agenda. In other words, there's a need for leadership. We hear a lot about reform. COAG is a vital mechanism for bringing the states along with the Commonwealth. So let's see some leadership.
All right, let's move on. There are lots of pressures still on the Prime Minister. Nick Xenophon, the Greens have been pushing same-sex marriage and pushing along with some on the Labor side, including Doug Cameron sitting here. Will it eventually happen within the Labor government and within Labor? Will they move to a position that is quite different from the one they hold now?
Well, firstly, I think, and Doug can correct me on this, it'll probably be a conscience vote. I'm not sure, Doug, whether it'll be a conscience vote or not. But I think, so. Yeah, and so that'll be interesting. So that means that I think, you know, Liberal members, I don't know what Malcolm Turnbull's position is, but I'd imagine it would be close. Well, no, I shouldn't verbal Malcolm because I'm not sure what his position is, but I support civil unions. I think that's that would be a reform, and I'm still willing to talk and engage with those on the same-sex marriage debate in terms of marriage equality. So I think that you know, we'll get a vote on that probably in this Parliament.
All right, Doug, if you do, should it be extended out to, you know, discussion until the ALP conference next year, or should it be done sooner? And if it does get through, will you cop a massive backlash from some of the more conservative elements of the electorate who support Labor as well?
Well, I don't know where this massive backlash will come for Labor. That's where I disagree with Paul's analysis that Labor's heartland would desert over this issue. That's not been the international experience. I live and work just outside the western suburbs of Sydney. I'm pretty well known in some of those areas. People know my point of view, and I'm not getting a backlash about this issue. The backlash, if there is any backlash, are people who are just not prepared to accept that human rights, equal rights, should be in Australia. And I just think that's wrong. I don't think you should be discriminated against under the law because of your sexual preferences. I just think it's crazy.
Paul Fletcher, will pigs fly before the coalition embraces this, and would you rather sort of try and put a wedge into Labor on this issue?
Well, just to be clear, we certainly haven't put this issue on the agenda with a view to playing political games. The issue was, in fact, put on the agenda by Adam Bandt, the Greens member. The Howard government was instrumental in removing many forms of discrimination that quite incorrectly existed.
But you're going to stay where you are now?
Well, the important principle is removing discrimination. We've seen that done in a whole range of important areas. But on the question of marriage, the position in the legislation is that marriage is a union between a man and a woman. That's the party's position.
There's not one position in the Liberal Party on this. It's clear that Senator Birmingham has come out, Simon Birmingham, and said that he supports marriage equality. You see business now moving. Heather Ridout from AIG saying that it's discriminatory and it should go. You see Labour, right and left. It's not a factional issue. It's not a right-left issue. It's an issue of human rights.
But
I think that'll come through.
Do you think Australians in many ways are more socially progressive and they just accept these things, these sorts of changes?
Absolutely. And I'm convinced that once this legislation goes through, when we get to a legislative position, that it will not be an issue. It will not be an issue in Australia. The same as in Catholic Spain. the same as in Argentina, the same as in Canada. I mean, South Africa. Why can't we behave the same way towards our fellow Australians?
Paul Kelly, which way do you think this is going to go?
But I think it's quite hard to predict. I feel the Labor Party is very divided on this issue, and I think it will be a troubling and difficult issue for the Labor Party. We should bear in mind that this issue is driven by the Greens. This is absolutely central to the Green agenda, and I think the public will see to a very considerable extent Labor following the Greens on this issue. I also think that because it's such a benchmark issue, if Labor commits to this, it will brand Labor as a socially progressive party. And that is a very significant step for Labor to take. I think there will be a political downside in relation to that. Very hard to tell how significant that downside is, but I certainly feel that there are far more significant risks for Labor in this situation.
It's not one of Paul's better analysis of the political situation in Australia, let me say.
You said not true, not true. What did you mean?
Well, it's not true. The Labour Party, through senior Labour politicians like Anthony Albanese, have been pushing to move to this position for years. But you can't really argue that there's unity on this issue. I mean, you've got the Prime Minister saying no, 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 basically. But there is a policy in place now, and there's a debate about changing that policy. And I'm convinced that the change in policy will be towards a progressive policy that treats all Australians the same. These Australians are people that are saving, other Australians' lives. They put fires out. They are not some kind of, terrible human being. They are Australians, and they deserve a fair go, and they deserve equality under the law.
I just might make one point. Julia Gillard is on the record here, quite clearly saying she opposes gay marriage. And the reason she opposes gay marriage is because she thinks it's inconsistent with Australia's traditions. She's quite unequivocal about that, and I think this will be a problem for the Labor Party, given such a firm public position adopted by the Prime Minister.
All right, we are going to take a very short break. Do stay with us on The Nation. We'll be back. We've got lots more to discuss. Welcome back to The Nation, and with me on the panel tonight is Labor Senator Doug Cameron, Nick Xenophon, Independent Senator from South Australia, Paul Kelly, Editor-at-Large on the Australian newspaper, and Paul Fletcher, Liberal MP. Now, we're delighted to have you all here, but let's get into our next issue, which is the nuclear debate. Now, it sort of came and went very quickly. Paul Fletcher, do you think this one is going to get up, and is it really perhaps their revenge against the same-sex marriage issue? Julia Gillard has deftly sort of batted it away till the end of next year with the ALP conference. But in a sense, did she leave the door open to, even though she said, it's going to be very hard for anyone to actually change the policy and argue and win this argument, was that a little door left open?
Well, it does seem to be a bizarre way to be running the country and developing policy, that an issue like nuclear power in Australia gets put on the agenda by one half of the Labor Party in revenge for the other half of the Labor Party expressing views about gay marriage. That seems like a very curious way to be developing policy on any issue. Does she genuinely want an open debate on the topic? I would certainly be very sceptical. The fundamental issue, I think, is this. When Kevin Rudd came to power, we heard that there was going to be evidence-based policy. If you look at the way that in the last years of the Howard government, the issue of nuclear power was dealt with, there was a very substantive report by Professor Dr. Switkowski.
Then you ran away.
Which laid out the issues. So, in other words, a serious attempt to look at the issues rather than things just getting on the agenda and through some kind of random process of internal game playing.
All right. Doug, was that an unfair characterisation, that it was the right sort of revenge for the same-sex marriage push?
Oh, I think so. I've been asking for more debate in the party, and one of the big problems we have in this country in political debate is as soon as someone raises an issue that may not accord with the views of the majority, then it's a split. It's a problem. The government's in trouble. And I don't think that's good for political debate in this country. people want to raise nuclear power, let them do it, and let's have the debate.
All right, is it going to be pushed under the carpet, though?
I don't know if it would be pushed under the carpet. I think, the debate's there, but I think it really is an issue of economics in terms of nuclear power. I don't see the economics stacking up. I don't see you could even get a nuclear power industry started in this country for decades. Whether we'd be in the business of being able to get the skills, these are all huge issues for nuclear power.
Well, Nick Xenophon, Ziggy Switkowski from ANSTO seems to think, we indeed can get an industry up, but it would be an expensive alternative at the beginning of the process.
Sure, and I think we need to look at some policy imperatives. I think we do need to reduce greenhouse gases. I think it's a good thing to do. Even for the climate sceptics out there, it's an issue of risk management. And if you want to reduce greenhouse gases in terms of the energy sector by 30, 40, 50%, we've got an abundance of natural gas, which would be a good transitional fuel, which would keep us going, I think, in terms of meeting even very ambitious targets for at least 20 or 30 years. So I don't think you'll be foolish to rule out nuclear power, but there are a whole range of alternatives out there that I think offer practical alternatives, and geothermal. If in the next 10 years geothermal as a form of baseload power, which is virtually zero emissions, Australia really could be a world leader in that.
If it got to the point where you had a say, even though we're going to talk later about you will lose your balance of power in July next year.
I'm counting the sleeps.
Yeah. Would you say no way in the end?
No, look, I think you need to look at the evidence, but I want us to look at the alternatives before we go down the nuclear path. I think we need to say that alternative methods of energy production, such as gas, such as geothermal, such as emerging solar technologies, won't work. And I don't think we've got anywhere near that stage yet. But it would be foolish to rule out nuclear power. I think that would simply be bloody-minded and ideological. But I don't think we actually need to go down that path for many years, given the alternatives that are on the horizon.
But see, one of the problems here is that you've got Labor governing in coalition with the Greens, and the Greens do want to rule it out. They want to rule it out completely, and so as a result, that's what's driving Prime Minister Gillard's desperate desire to get this issue off the agenda, because she's not in a position to have an open debate about it.
How can you make
Paul
that
Kelly,
analysis?
do you think there is a little window that Julia Gillard may have left open, or do you think she is dead against it?
Oh, well, she's certainly not in favour of it, but I think there is a slight window open, and clearly, sooner or later, the Labor Party will have to move to a position on nuclear energy which enables the issue to be assessed on merit, along with other energy sources. At the moment, it's clearly not economical, and the barriers are very significant in economic terms. But if we're looking at the restructuring of our energy sector with a carbon price over the next 30 to 35 years, then clearly clearly nuclear energy has got to be put on the table and assessed.
Can I just say on this issue of nuclear energy, there is a worldwide shortage of the skills to build nuclear power stations, and that is an issue. And whether we are a big enough market, even if we decided to do it, to get the skills here and get the imports here, I would doubt it. And my view is you must never forget coal, and carbon capture and storage needs to be addressed, because the future of this country is still going to be coal for a long time.
You really believe in carbon capture and storage?
Yep. I think it can happen, because I'll tell you, if it doesn't happen, then the cement industry, the steel industry, the power industry is in a lot of trouble, and we should not ignore that either.
But that could sound like wishful thinking. You want it to happen to save all those industries, but we have no proof yet that it can work effectively.
Well, we know it can work. It's about scaling it up, and it's getting it at the right price.
Paul Kelly, would you have a view about that?
Well, we know that in technological terms it does work. But the great difficulty is developing this at scale and developing it so that it's viable in a financial sense. Now, this is
actually using it in the world.
Exactly. Now, this is a pretty significant hurdle, but there's a lot of investment and a lot of work going into this.
All over the world. And the argument in the UK, and I was there last year, was who could put more money into either Labour or the Conservatives in the UK. So it's not off the agenda elsewhere.
It certainly seems a great deal more rational to be exploring the technology rather than in some ways throwing up your hands in horror and saying, well coal's a bad source of energy, we're not going to use it, which again is the Greens' position.
I hope it can work. I really do hope it can work, because we have such a huge
carbon capture and storage.
But when power industry insiders say that it's a long way off, it's still pie in the sky for doing it at scale, then I think I'd like to see the sort of money that's going to carbon capture and storage into geothermal energy, into new solar technologies as well.
All right, well, Julia Gillard has now put that off until next year. Paul Kelly, is this, she said that this is going to be part of her year of action, that she is heading towards a carbon price. Will she deliver?
This is a really significant statement that we saw from the Prime Minister this week. What she said is that her principal objective next year in terms of economic reform is to price carbon. Next year is the year of decision. She wants this legislated. Now, there's only one way it can be legislated. Labor has got to legislate this with the support of the Greens. And this is going to be a tremendous political issue next year, because essentially what Julia Gillard is saying is she's stacked all her credentials on getting through a bill where the Greens can determine her fate. Now, will the Greens do what they did to Kevin Rudd? Will they hang out at the end of the day and refuse to support Gillard just as they refused to support Kevin Rudd? And who will bear the political responsibility if that happens? I think that if there is to be a bill, if there is to be a carbon price legislated on Labor-Green votes, Labor will only accept a modest carbon price. What that means is the Greens are going to have to move a long way. They are going to have to make very significant concessions. Their base won't like that. This is going to be an acid test of the authority of the Greens and what they stand for.
Can Julia Gillard do that?
Well, if any politician in the country can do it, it's Julia Gillard, and she's ably supported by Greg Combie. I've got every confidence in the Prime Minister and the Minister to take this issue to the Greens and get an outcome. Now, look, we must get a price on carbon, because Paul spoke about the political implications. The economic implications for this country are huge. If we don't get it, we will not be in the leadership in terms of research and development. We will not be creating the jobs that are required for the future, and the cost will be greater in the long term. So we want to take it forward.
Look, I think the process is interesting, and I've got I don't want to sound like a whinger on this. I did try and get on the committee, because the coalition didn't want to be part of that committee to look at climate change, a price on carbon. Tried, made representations, and I got a polite knockback, and I think there was no room at the inn sort of approach. And I just worried. Well,
see you later.
I don't know if it's going to help, Paul, but look, I wonder about the process. I wonder how robust the process is.
To get to a price on carbon. I still think some form of an emissions trading scheme, so long as it is efficient, as long as it's sustainable in terms of economic terms, is the best way of doing it. But I thought that the model that was put up last year, Doug, I thought it was a disaster. It would have given us very little for a very high cost.
But you had an agenda running the whole time.
You had an
agenda running.
Sorry, he's verbaled me now. The agenda was you could have gone down as much smarter design, which would have meant a higher cut in greenhouse emissions for a lower cost.
It's a pity nobody else agreed with you. That's the problem.
Doug, you could argue that debacle on ETS has been responsible for all your woes this year.
Oh, look, there is absolutely no doubt about it that when we walked away from a price on carbon, our political position crashed, and we've paid a heavy price for that. And we should make sure we never do that again.
All right.
It's really a pretty extraordinary thing for the Prime Minister to say, isn't it? Next year will be the year of decision and delivery, I think she said. She might as well have said, well, this was the year of dumping and disarray. She's effectively conceding right off 2010, because nothing has really been achieved. But next year, I'm going to be doing stuff.
All right, well, one thing
Straight out of the Tony Abbott hymn book.
One thing that she is sticking to is the NBN. Now, we've had the first piece of legislation through this week. The release of the full business plan is apparently still coming. There was talk of 7-year confidentiality, Nick Xenophon, which you said no way to. Was that just a try-on? And then when you did get a 36-page summary, were you duped?
No, not at all. I mean, the whole issue here was, firstly, it was a fiasco about this confidentiality agreement. Firstly, 7 years, that was what the confidentiality agreement said. Then it was changed, I think, to 2 years. And then 2 weeks until after the bill had been dealt with. I mean, 2 weeks may have as well have been 7 years. What I got from the government was just enough information. 36 pages was better than having 0 pages. It gave a broad outline, plus the fact the government will have to release virtually all of the business plan in the coming month after the ACCC makes a determination, which I understand is any day now. I think it would have
all right,
made
but you have sided with the government. You have allowed this to start happening. Why are you so convinced it's going to work and that it's not going to blow out and that the technology is going to be fantastic?
But Helen, I didn't vote for the NBN per se.
Well, it's the first leg of it.
But one of the issues, this was about the structural separation of Telstra, and I know Paul Fletcher's got an enormous background in telecommunications. But the issue is when the coalition privatised Telstra, they did it in a way that meant that Australia ended up with one of the most vertically integrated telecommunication systems in the world. Yeah. Bad for competition, bad for consumers. The OECD was quite scathing of it in years gone by.
Right, so it should have been separated years ago.
And this facilitates that. And the NBN is another piece of legislation that will come up. Earlier this week, I made it very clear that I will not support any legislation if there's price discrimination so that Telstra is advantaged. Otherwise, we'll end up with another vertically integrated monopoly.
Well, I'm told that's not going to happen.
Well, look at the legislation.
I'm told that's not going to happen.
The bill in its
current form. Maybe you need to
doesn't.
clarify that.
All right, Paul Fletcher does have some expertise in this area. Why are you so convinced this is not going to work? Because I think I've put to you before, if you were still at Optus, it's likely you would support this.
The question as to whether it serves the interest of Optus or any other private sector company is different to the question of whether it is in Australia's national interest. Now, it's been argued that Labor's plan is a good plan because it delivers structural separation. That's to say, you break up the network from Telstra's retail business. And I am certainly a supporter of structural separation, so is Malcolm Turnbull, who's our spokesman on the issue. But the important point is this: you do not need to spend $35 billion of taxpayers' money, even if your stated rationale is to achieve structural separation. Why not just break up the company into two without putting an enormous amount of taxpayers' money at risk? Because what the government is actually doing here is they are saying to Telstra, first split into two, then take the network business and junk it. Dump it. That existing network, just trash it. And we're going to build a brand new one. That is a remarkably wasteful thing to do.
They're going to use some of the same infrastructure.
They're not. They're not. They are trashing the entire network. It is to be completely overbuilt. So even in those parts of Australia which are today served by the two cable networks of Telstra and Optus, which are already capable of delivering 100 megabits per second, this plan will require that those networks be shut down. So we are creating a new government-owned monopoly at enormous expense to serve even areas that already can get 100 megabits per second.
Is there an argument to say that, you said why spend taxpayers' money, that no company will put the money in, private enterprise won't do this?
No, there isn't that argument at all. Except for rural and remote areas where it's uncontentious between the major political parties that there needs to be public investment, because those are areas the market will not serve in a commercial way. But except for those areas, for the majority of premises, the private sector, if you structured it properly, certainly would invest. And indeed Telstra, as far ago as 2005, put forward a plan to do just that.
The market has failed. The market has completely failed. And I just can't understand why you're sitting here running that line when you don't believe in it. And you wrote a book called The Wired Brown Land.
I did write a book
called You wrote a book called The Wired Brown Land. And what did you say? You said with broadband in every home, news services, video conferences would be commonplace. With broadband in every home, new services would spring up. Banking, shopping, information, educational, health services would expand to take advantage of this new, widely available communications channel. That's what you said, and you can't do it with an old network. You've got to do it with a new network. You know it, and all you're doing is parroting your leader's line, which is about blocking, which is about destroying, and you are being hypocritical.
Do you want to hear from me?
I'm telling you what you wrote. I'm telling you what you wrote.
Because I'm getting pretty sick of being verbaled by you and by Julia Gillard and by a whole bunch of Labor politicians.
But you're a politician. You've got to be, get some, bit of toughness in you on this stuff.
Don't lecture me, Doug. Don't lecture me.
Doug, you've had to say.
Let me tell you.
Stand over you on this.
What I believe in.
Don't let Tony Abbott stand over you.
Stop lecturing me, Doug, and let me tell you what I believe in. I believe in competition. I believe in an upgraded broadband infrastructure, and I believe in doing it in the most cost-effective and pro-competitive way. Your plan squanders $35 billion of taxpayers' money. It involves building in parts of Australia where there is no need to build because there is already a network, and your plan involves suppressing competition because even in areas where there is already competitive infrastructure, that will be shut down and it will be replaced with a government-owned monopoly. And we see now in this latest plan that there should only be 14 points of interconnect, that even the backhaul, that even the transmission is going to be a monopoly.
And you can be a Luddite with Tony. You can be a Luddite with Tony.
Are we talking about policy or are we talking about cheap slogans?
I wouldn't have thought that you would have been,
and let's look at the issues that really matter here. So the issues that matter here.
Could I just ask you, is it your understanding, it's my understanding, that parts of the network will be salvaged, will be used, and in fact Telstra gets a rental, if you like. They lease those. They do get rental through to 2020.
There will be some parts of Telstra's ducts will be used so that the new fibre can be built through those. But substantively what Telstra is being paid for is to shut down its network and to move its customers over to the new network. Telstra is being paid to shut down an existing network. This is a really important point. This is a deal. The deal between National Broadband Network Company and Telstra would be in breach of the Trade Practices Act as anti-competitive if it were not for the fact that the legislation that has just gone through the Parliament specifically authorises the deal by varying what would otherwise be the law. This would be anti-competitive because the general principle is that where you have two companies and one pays the other to exit the industry, that reduces competition. And that is exactly what Labor is doing.
So you would like Telstra to stay the dominant player in the wholesale area?
What I would like to see happening is that we maximise competition, and if the Labor government wants to build a new network, then it certainly ought not be able, through the force of law and government fiat, to require the existing network to be shut down.
Paul Kelly, is this going to get through?
Oh, I think it'll get through. I mean, all the signs are that it will get through. But the point I'd make is that Labor is breaking its own solemn principles. Labor has said when it comes to new infrastructure that these decisions will be based on proper cost-benefit analysis. It has singularly refused to subject the NBN to that analysis. And the reason is pretty clear. It's because it wouldn't stand up. One of the issues here is whether the $35 billion could be spent more effectively. Well, this has been criticised. It's been criticised by the Federal Treasury. It's been criticised by the OECD.
Being criticised doesn't make it correct what the criticism is. And you are just making assertion after assertion with no backing. Absolutely no backing.
Doug, why won't the government submit the NBN then to the Productivity Commission? You tell me.
The NBN
No,
will be
you tell me why.
Let me tell you, the NBN will be the most looked at piece of legislation. It will be
absolute
under
nonsense.
huge
There is
scrutiny.
no cost-benefit analysis. That is complete nonsense. There is no cost-benefit analysis. Why?
Oh, sorry,
you wanted to make an issue of this.
Yeah, I'll
you
make
answer
an
it
issue.
then. Why?
Well, there is no need for a cost-benefit analysis.
But it's the same policy.
So, Doug, how is it going to be scrutinised?
In our history as a
That's
country.
not nonsense.
How will it be scrutinised, you just said, if it's not subjected to these sorts of normal business practices?
This is typical from the Australian, let me tell you.
Just leave that out. Just tell us how it's going to be scrutinised.
We're talking about the merits of the issue.
If you'll stop talking, I'll tell you.
Go ahead.
If you'll
Doug
stop
Cameron,
talking. Okay. This is going to be scrutinised. It's been scrutinised. There will be a published business plan. There will be estimates where the chief executive and the chief officers, the operating officers, will need to be at estimates. This will be scrutinised more than any other company in the country. And that will happen.
Don't you think the Productivity Commission is a good...
But what we want to do is get on with the job.
We
want to build a broadband that you could never do in 11 and a half years.
Australia. The Rudd government, the Gillard government set up Infrastructure Australia, which is the specialised body to manage these major projects. Its core principle is cost-benefit study. That's just been ignored.
I think we might just finish here by noting that the Governor of the Reserve Bank, in the evidence he gave to the Parliament the other day, said in this situation there should be a cost-benefit analysis. That is the merit of the issue.
Well,
on
that's
that
the view.
basis, on
That's
that
the
note,
view.
we're
don't
going to
agree.
have a short break, because I don't think we're ever going to agree on the NBN. So we've discussed that well. We'll be back with more of The Nation right after this.